So my name is Mike McMinn. I'm the varsity boys head coach and the co-program director up at Saratoga Rowing. The other half of the operation is Lauren Shaw, who's the varsity girls coach and co-program director. Sort of a new structure for us. We started with that this summer. But I'm here to talk about building culture, which I know some people had some really good insights on throughout some other presentations. This one will not really go too deep into training plan so much in terms of specifics or technical stuff, but we'll try to stick really to how to shape the culture of the team. A little bit of background for me. I grew up in upstate New York. I rowed for Niskayuna High School. We had sort of mixed success at the time. We did a lot of eights during the year. We did a lot of sculling over the summer. From there, I moved on and rowed as a lightweight at Cornell, where the team was quite fast and pretty successful. I was decent, but far from the best guy on the team, and I think that was pretty informative for me, especially coming off my high school background. Coaching wise, I didn't list this here, but I did actually start at Saratoga Rowing, home for a school break. I assisted a little bit in 2007. I helped Gene Tarrant out with the club sculling program up there. Usually SRA is a bit of a mix of club and scholastic kids. And at the time, the club kids were more of a separate small boat operation. So Chris Chase got me up there way back in the day. And that was actually my first coaching job. I was the head coach and program director at Albany Rowing Center for a number of years. We had some reasonable success there. We had some boats in A finals at youth nationals. We had some gold medalists at Canadian Henley. We had a kid pull a medal at Junior Worlds. We had a couple other kids at selection camps. So that was a pretty successful couple of years. At a point, I felt like I was feeling a little bit stale and feeling like I needed some room to grow. And so I sort of took a big chance on moving to Texas. So I had a good contact there with a friend of mine, Mary Lennington, who's still down there as the associate head coach. And we talked about the possibility of me coming down to help out with the program there and learn with her and with Dave O'Neill and Mara Allen, who were still there. Nick Baker has since joined that staff, and Nick's been great as well. So I spent 2 years down at the University of Texas and coaching Division I women. I also assisted with the Texas Rowing Center, coaching novice kids in the afternoons, which was sort of I felt like that was a bit of a laboratory sort of experience for me of being able to test out ways that my approach was sort of shifting based off the experience at Texas and sort of how to form a team and how to start kids from scratch, and just a new challenge of seeing what kind of speed and culture could be put together starting from zero. And so that was a ton of fun. In summer of 2019, I took a job up at Port Rowing on the North Shore of Long Island. That's sort of at the time, it was a fairly big roster. Actually, it was about 50 or so high school kids. There were some unique challenges there. It's on saltwater. It's on the Long Island Sound. It's rough water pretty often. It's difficult to get assistant coaches. There are a lot of obstacles there, but it was a pretty unique challenge. While I was there, I was fortunate to get in touch with Nick Lee Parker at Columbia. And so I was volunteer assisting for him probably 3 mornings a week, just driving out to Overpeck, helping coach practice. And it was a good contrast to where we're at with Port, where I was back in a wakeless launch most of the time, which we're not at Port, was back in flat water most of the time, was working with some more developed athletes that just sort of helped keep my eyes sharp for what I was looking for. And it just put me back into being a piece of a staff that had good conversation, good ideas, sharing, and insights. And so I felt like that helped me just continue pushing forward. This past summer 2021, Eric Catalano had been trying to rope me into this Saratoga rowing thing for quite a while, and finally I caved and found this great opportunity up there as the varsity boys coach and program director, which is where I'm at now and where I expect to be for the foreseeable future. So I want to talk a little bit about the culmination of those experiences and how that's really informed how I approach program building. And I'll have to apologize for these slides are going to spit everything out at once, but I'll be going through it sort of piece by piece. So I want to start with sort of how I view program development and program management. My goal ultimately here is to create the best possible high school team sport experience, which should be fun, it should be positive, and it should produce really fast boats. I try to make sure that I view it through the lens of, especially, you know, in the US, we sort of operate in this after school youth sports culture, where we are really competing against other teams within school systems for athletes, whether you're club or scholastic, that still tends to be really the model that you're stuck in. So whether you're competing against school sports from multiple schools, or if you're a school team, I think it's important to ask how my team is perceived within that market and what impact I can have on that. Since I feel like it's, you know, one of the big headaches of rowing is how do we get good athletes in the door? Mistakes that I feel like I've made at times, or I've seen people make, is just, it's important to respect the athleticism and work required in other sports, or you're going to limit your talent pool. So I think at times I feel like we slip into, you know, rowing is the hardest sport ever. You know, there's t-shirts and regattas of real athletes row, everyone else just plays games. But like some of those games are really hard, right? And the training that those teams do to be really good at those games is really hard. So I don't think that it necessarily does us a lot of good to, you know, to try to separate ourselves further, when actually what we want to do is be a more mainstream piece of that after school youth team sport model. I try to make it really simple, make it understandable for kids coming into the sport. It's a racing sport. Need to make it relatable. It's easy to visualize if you show video. Stake boats, lane lines, those, like, I try to introduce that to kids the first time I really talk to them about the sport in most cases. First day of a novice practice, first day of a freshman year, we're looking at video of what the sport looks like in the spring season, stake boats, lane lines, attention, go. And I think that makes it far easier to connect again into that after school youth sports model of what are we really getting kids into. I try to make sure that we're not creating barriers to entry in the sense of, it's really simple, right? Legs, body, arms in the drive, arms, body, legs in the recovery, work super hard. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it is really, really simple. And so I try to teach it from a standpoint of like, hey, this is pretty straightforward. Like if you work really hard, you can be good at this. And I try to stay away from it's going to take a lifetime to master it, and it's really tricky, and it's this big technical endeavor. You're going to need to learn all this terminology. I try to make it seem really approachable and simple. Like, hey, you could be good at this, and this is what it looks like. Everyone should know what the team is about. That's people within your target market and people within your program. So I do think it's helpful if you are, you know, if consistency is good year to year. So I know for us at Saratoga, we're sort of making a little bit of a shift to eights being a little bit more of what the team is about. And I prefer to go that direction, purely because eights help with volume of bodies in the door, which we all need to keep things running. And we want it to be, I want it to be the biggest, most fun team sport atmosphere that it can be. And I feel like eights are the best mechanism to facilitate that. That does not mean that I believe that kids should only row eights. We do, you know, up at Saratoga, we have a pretty extensive middle school program. I think we had about 60 kids in the middle school program this fall. The middle school program is like 90% sweep row, or 90% spelling rather. The kids have good small boat skills. Most kids hit their freshman year capable of rowing singles and doubles. So we do think that that's important, and that improves their awareness of what's happening in the boat and improves their skills when we do transition to the bigger team boats. And we do incorporate those into training still at that higher level. But when we're trying to get people to visualize what our team is about, I think it's easier if it's big team, rowing eights, going fast. And if for you that's fours, or for you if that's, if you're a NERA team and fours are your thing, that's great. Or if you're a NERA eights team, if you're a quads program, or if you're a mix. But I still think it's, consistency is really helpful in terms of building the culture of what your team is about. We're welcoming to anyone who wants to show up with a great attitude and work really hard. So I think it's critical that you stress to come work really hard. The athletes need to know they're getting into a competitive sport where the goal is racing. So the goal is racing boats really fast, right? We're training every single day to reduce time spent covering distance. So everything that we do is adding up towards that. There are going to be kids in the program who are also there for social reasons, but we try to make sure that, and that's great that we have those kids, but we try to make sure that everyone who is there is actively working towards being part of a really fast team that works hard. And then focusing, this is more of an internal program thing, but focusing on now while having a plan and vision for later. For me, that's when we were at Port, there was when I was at Port rather, there was constantly this push for grow, grow, grow. We wanted more and more kids all the time. The board was pushing really hard, get more kids, get more kids, get more kids. But I started that job with a roster of 50 high school boys with no assistant coach. So focus on now and deliver the best possible experience to the kids in your program, and don't compromise the experience for the kids in your program right now for the sake of some broader vision down the road. And I think if you do that really well and emphasize what's happening right now with the team, eventually that will lead to good reputation in the community, good experience for the kids, good word of mouth marketing, and that will help you grow. Moving on to coaching expectations. This is another element of how we build culture in a program. I look at this as sort of self-reflection of what do I expect of myself and what do I expect of a coaching staff. This is, by the way, mostly written from a head coach lens. I think this is probably the most critical piece for me is if they're not getting it, I think I'm a bad rowing coach, right? I think that's really important. I'd always sort of felt that way. The first time I really heard that verbalized, I was out on the launch with Dave O'Neill at Texas, and we had a visiting coach from another junior program out on the launch, and we were having a day where somebody in I think the second eight was missing pauses over and over again, just like wasn't on top of the ball. And so it was getting frustrating. She just wasn't figuring it out. And so we finally took a breather for a minute, and the visiting junior coach in the launch asked, what goes through your head when an athlete, just isn't getting it? Like they're just not doing what you're telling them to do. And I think this may be paraphrased, but I think Dave basically said, if they're not getting it, like I think I'm bad at my job. I think I'm a bad rowing coach. And I think that's really important. So it's ultimately, you're going to have kids that are more difficult, but if you're not constantly looking at yourself as the answer to fixing it, I think you end up in trouble. I try to stress no bad boats leave our boat bays. Everyone should be competent in the sport. I don't think it does us any favors to have kids that don't understand how to scull it around, get into stake boats properly, keep themselves locked on, can't lift the boats properly. Just the absolute basic fundamental skills of the sport, I think, are probably the most critical thing to really hammer home. Every athlete and every boat that leaves our dock should represent the team well at a fundamental level. So that means I put a lot of emphasis on making sure the worst athlete in our program is as good as possible and as competent as possible. Model the behavior you expect from the athletes. So be on time, attitude, body language, all of these things are relevant from the coaching standpoint as well. Keeping your cool. So not just losing it when things get frustrating, I think is really important. And if we expect that of the kids, we expect the kids to not snap at each other and blow up at each other and handle stress well, then we need to emulate that. Be approachable. So it's easy to say, I'm approachable, come talk to me, right? I don't understand why people are saying I'm not approachable. Is different than being approachable. So sometimes that's going to mean you seeing that there could be something that's off with someone or with a kid, or an issue could be brewing. Sometimes you being approachable means you call the parent, right? Sometimes it means you talk to the kid first, or you reach out to the parent first and try to nip those things in the bud and be as personable about it as you can. And I think oftentimes there's this instinct to throw a big wall up and say, I'm the coach, I only deal with the athlete. If you want to express a concern, you need to self-advocate. And those skills are important, but also there are times where you need to be the person who sort of reaches that hand out. Be on time, respect everyone's time. So that goes back a little bit to modeled behavior, but I hate wasting kids' time. I hate wasting parents' time. We try to finish to the minute practice on time. And I think if we hold them to that, then it's a lot easier, or if we hold ourselves to that, rather, it makes it a lot easier to hold the kids to owning their commitment as well. So I try not to take any extra time from the kids that I haven't laid out well in advance. So I view the season schedule and the practice schedule as an agreement between me and the kids. That's like, hey, this is what the season's going to look like for us. This is what I expect of you. You have that. We agree to it. And then I'm not just going to start adding mandatory extra morning sessions, and I'm not going to start keeping kids 30 minutes after practice, right? Those would all be things where we had to agree to a change. So I think that stuff is critical. Assistant coaches need to understand their roles very clearly. And then probably the most important part of this is it's the head coach's job to make that clear. So I think it's an easy trap to fall into, to assume that the assistant coaches, because they've coached before or because they have good rowing experience, that the assistant coaches will just get it and they'll understand what you're looking for. But I think it's important to lay out for the assistant coaches, like, hey, you're taking these crews out today. This is the workout. These are the drills that you're going through. This is why we're doing them, in the same way that it needs to be really clear to the kids. So that's super important. And I think when the assistant coaches clearly understand where they fit in the structure, that can also be an element that eases pressure from kids and parents, where if the kids understand that the assistant coach and head coach are fully on the same page, and that the information coming from the assistant coaches is because the head coach is really driving those issues, and everybody on the team is working on X, Y, and Z together, that's going to minimize the number of times you have parents get upset that their kid is having some sort of lesser experience, or the kid doesn't feel like they're being given a shot. I think that matters a lot. Minimize unforced errors. So I consider unforced errors things like going out in idiotic, unsafe conditions. If you look at the picture on the left, that's a picture of the dock at Port Rowing. That is one of the worst days. That's actually a screenshot from a video clip. That dock is getting bounced probably 4 or 5 feet in the air as waves come through. That's obviously a day where we did not go out. But minimizing unforced errors where you're not pushing the envelope in conditions that could be unsafe. You're not giving them impossible workouts. You're not failing to use the ultimate safety feature in team communications, which is save as draft in your email. Firing off a response way too quickly without thinking what you're doing. Over promising and under delivering. I think is a big pitfall with this sort of stuff. So, not telling kids you're going to give them something you're not going to give them. So that could be telling a kid, like, you're going to get a seat race, you're going to get a shot at this, and then not following through with that. If parents are upset about that, they're justified. So, and if kids are upset about that as well, and then generally anything that amounts to losing your cool, and anything that could lead to you sort of losing the team, and that's, you don't want to go down that road. So I think just, it's not having the best training plan, it's not having the best rigging set up all the time, it's not making the best lineup decisions, it's minimizing bad choices. If you make it a big deal, they'll make it a big deal. If you talk about selection every day, they will think about selection every day. And some of them will anyway. But if you talk about selection and fairness and doing X, Y, and Z to have to make the boat, and this is how selection is that's going to be the only thing they think about. So I try to focus on, to the kids, I make being the best teammate possible the biggest deal of anything that we can possibly do. So being the best teammate, being a really good team, every boat being good, nobody on the team being bad, I make those things the biggest possible deal for us. And I try to talk about selection as little as possible, which we'll get to in a moment, on a later slide here. But that's something that matters a lot to me. And then from a coaching expectation standpoint, I have never finished a tough season and thought, like, wow, if only I had talked more, if only I had parked my launch, not moved around, and just talked at the kids more. I have finished plenty of seasons and thought, like, I should have kept my mouth shut and we should have just trained and kept focusing on what we had been doing, the fundamentals that had set us up well early in the season, and not gotten distracted. So I think that's an important reminder. In terms of practice environment, so how you set up your team's environment, that's going to have a big impact on team culture. So I try to keep it as simple, fun, and predictable as possible from a training standpoint. So we try to keep the workouts really straightforward. So, if we try to lay out, like, hey, like, we're going to be doing some hard pieces tomorrow, 4 by 1500 meters. These are the stroke rates. Everyone's going to start from the start line. And it's possible that we'll stop at the dock and make some switches. Convenient for us because we practice on a race course. Not everybody has that advantage, but for us, being able to cross the finish line and then immediately dock, stand up in the dock, and switch the middle fours of the 2/8 or something, like, that's really easy for us. And that's stuff that we do often. So we will do even boats all the time to drive inter-squad competition. When I think about that, I do more and more over the last several years, I have tried to think about that more from a standpoint of relating it to other team sports, where, like, you're running plays over and over again with the offensive line and defensive line with football, where you're 5-on-5 basketball, whatever it might be, creating inter-squad competition. I try to make sure I'm prioritizing team development over ranking. I try to avoid ranking being the pressing thing. So we'll do a lot of even boats. We'll do a lot of pair edition racing. We'll do switches, but oftentimes that will be, we'll run a 1500 meter piece or run a 1250. We'll stop at the dock and I'll switch the middle fours. And then we'll run another piece and I'll switch the pairs. I'll switch 3 and 4 back between the two boats. And then we'll run another piece and we'll switch 5 and 6 back, and we've returned to the original lineups. And so we're getting information, but it's not isolating the kids in a way where they're constantly every single day thinking about, did I beat so-and-so? And there may be some times for that, but I try to keep those really to a minimum and try to make sure that they understand that the priority at practice is making the team faster. We also use gold medal standard percentages, gold medal times. So if we have the first and second eights are out on the water, and I know that there should be a 10-second spread between those two boats over 1,500 meters or 12 seconds over 2,000 meters, whatever it might be, we might start them staggered where I say attention go on the second eight for 1,500, 10 seconds before I say attention go for the first eight. And so they're essentially racing the spread on the GMT percentages. And I think that helps drive, we're trying to push the standard up for both boats. In terms of practice intensity, I try to stress we're bending the oar every single stroke. We control intensity by stroke rate. So if we're out rowing 18 strokes a minute, I do fundamentally think that there are some technical elements to rowing where pressure on the drive is critical to feeling what's actually happening. So feeling pressure on the footboard, feeling a push all the way through for the duration the blade is covered. I think those things are pretty important and relevant. So, and I think in terms of team energy, if athletes understand that they're supposed to bend the oar every single stroke, if we're doing the pick drill, they're trying to be the best at the pick drill, then we're going to end up with a better team in the long run. In terms of land training, I consider 2K erg day race day. So we're never going to do surprise erg testing. We know when our races are on the spring season schedule. So I don't think there's there are coaches out there. I know it happened to me as a high school rower at one time or another. Surprise 2K, you need to be ready for anything. But the races are scheduled. So if the races are scheduled, we're never going to have surprise youth nationals. We're never going to have surprise Saratoga Invite. Those are on the schedule. We know when they are, and we're prepared for them. So I think if we're going to treat something as a race piece on the erg or a major race effort, that's how I would go about it. I really believe that in terms of driving team culture, in terms of we are a Northeast program that has to train indoors all winter. We may not get out until first or second week of April, depending on the thaw. So if the kids are doing erg workouts at brutal pacing efforts where they're going out, if I let them go out too hard on stuff and they're constantly blowing out mid-piece, it's that's a long winter. We negative split most erg workouts. I say most because occasionally we're doing shorter efforts that are we'll do 30 seconds on, minute 30 off, and work on some top end speed, work on some peak power development kind of stuff. But if we'll do a lot of 30-minute hard effort ergs, and I strongly stress negative split. On 2K erg day, I also stress negative split. I think it's important if your athletes are watching their average come down in the second half of the piece, right? That puts a lot of positive energy in the room. And it's difficult for kids to feel bummed about it if the entire room is surging with energy in the third 500 of the 2K, just really starting to hit the jets. The energy goes through the roof. So it's possible we could get kids to go a second or two faster if they even splitted things a little more. We're only talking about starting maybe a split above goal pace. But man, since I started doing it this way, the number of times the frequency with which kids PR and the number of times 2K erg day has been one of the most fun practices of the year, has increased exponentially. So that's been a major asset for the groups I've worked with the last couple of years. I love the bike erg. So I think the bike erg is great for breaking up the monotony of winter training. Culturally, it's good that we can get erg level intensity, and I really feel pretty close to an erg level training effect using the bike erg. It's a familiar interface to the kids, and it's just so hard. So I think that's probably the most critical part. So oftentimes during the winter, you're putting in high volume and you want to get in 70, 80 minutes of cardio volume in a practice. If you do all of it in the static erg, that can be pretty tough. So if you have the ability to utilize bike ergs, and if you're going to do 5 by 15 minutes or 4 by 20 minutes or even 3 by 20 minutes, doing one of those where you rotate the kids through the bike erg can be really helpful. And then it's also an area where kids who maybe they're not the top erg in the team, but like some of the kids can really grind in the bike erg, and it's a different kind of tough. So I think it's a really valuable tool where we've started looking at like 30-minute max effort bike erg as just like a team training challenge. And kids have really gotten on board with just sitting there and suffering for 30 minutes and making that like a point of team pride and that they have fun with, which is pretty great because it's pretty difficult for them to hurt themselves in the bike erg. So I found that to be probably one of the best training tool developments of the last couple of years. Selection, I look at this as the coaching staff uses objective data to inform what is ultimately a subjective decision on the best way to configure the team for competition. So I'm the coach. I determine how the team gets played, how the team goes out on the field, whatever it might be. And that's about the end of it. I don't think about it too much more than that. We have a whole bunch of data from the season. We have erg results. We have some switches made during practice where we look at the body of work, but I'm never going to select the boat based off of one switch, one piece, one day. I think that goes back into the minimizing unforced errors category for me. I don't run a person for person switch if you're not ready to deal with the consequences of that. And like those can be difficult things to walk back from. And it may not actually be indicative of what the fastest potential boat will be on race day. It may just be that kid had a really good piece that day. So I try to make it really clear it is a subjective decision based on a body of work through the season. And it's my job as the professional who does this for a living to like field the team how I think the team should be fielded. So I think that's a priority for me.
Mike, if you don't mind, we have a question that popped up related to the bike erg.
Yep.
What pace do you normally have your athletes using for the bike erg versus the erg? Is there a standard RPM or split versus watts that you would recommend?
That's a great question. The nice thing is, so the bike erg is 1,000-meter splits, but however it's calibrated, the 1,000-meter splits are, in terms of effort, comparable enough to the static erg that, like, if I have a kid who usually goes around 2 flat for like steady state pace in the static erg, they're probably going to go about 2 flat or maybe high 150s in the bike erg. I would expect the bike erg to ultimately be faster, but for some kids, they don't have the grit or just the quad development to just grind the bike that hard. And so some kids do go the same speed or even a touch slower as they acclimate to it. But I think in the long run, you end up going a few splits faster on the bike erg. But it's perfect. Close enough that the pacing is familiar.
Yep. Perfect. Thanks, Mike.
Yep. Cool. And then athlete expectations. So I said this before, I stress like be the best teammate possible. This is something that I didn't really focus on until my time spent coaching at the University of Texas, where we were focused on an NCAA team model where the championship is a points trophy of first 8, second 8, 4. So we carried a roster of about 70 athletes and everybody needed to be good. So to get enough competition that the fours group is fast enough, that the fours group is pushing hard enough, like there were, 40 something athletes who were not making the NCAA squad. And so getting everybody on board with like everyone's job is to make the team as good as possible is really important. And it gives everybody on the team purpose and value. So if you think that it's really important that the bottom kid on the team is really good, it's a lot harder for the bottom kid on the team to be upset. If it seems like you don't care, and if it seems like you don't own the responsibility of making sure that those kids aren't bad, then it's easy for those kids to be upset. Attitude and effort are everything. So I expect every single kid on the roster to have a good, positive attitude and to put in maximum effort. Positive attitude is a tricky one to define in a lot of ways. I think it can be a day-to-day thing, where if you're having a bad day, you just have to, like, it's a learned thing. You don't have to wear the emotions on your face. And then also, like, it'll happen occasionally where a kid is having a really bad day and the team needs to learn not to push, and not to pry too aggressively. But in terms of outgoing attitude, like, don't bring your baggage to practice. This is something that was huge for us at Texas, and I've really just gone all in on since. It's really fun to go really hard. And really fun to go really fast. I think if you make the team about the work and make the priority working super hard, having a ton of fun working hard with your teammates, and loving challenges, it'll sink in. So I don't think a single day goes by where I don't stress that, like, it's really fun, that it's difficult. And I do think psychologically there's something to be said for, if you tell yourself that's the case over and over again, like, you start to believe it. And so I think for kids, like, it really does start to sink in, which leads to the next one of, like, it doesn't have to be fun to be fun. So it's sort of a funny phrasing to read, but you think about it, and, like, ultimately that's what rowing is, right? It's a work sport. And so the thing that we all seem to really enjoy so much is pushing ourselves crazy hard with teammates. And so that's the really intrinsic value of the whole thing, is that it's really satisfying to give a full measure of effort as part of a big unit. And so we try to push that really hard. Look the part and act the part. Body language, which we already went over. Practice preparation. That includes, if it's really cold out, you got to wear layers that are appropriate, because, like, you sitting there shivering in a boat brings everybody down. So everybody needs to be on the same page there. I wrote this as race day focus, but I would say, I would phrase that more as where your focus is directed on race day. And this is, I think, something we all encounter at the youth level, where the kids' focus is directed on race day is cuddling in sleeping bags in the trailer and hanging hammocks up, they're probably not super focused on racing. So I try to stress, like, we show up dressed for a team sport endeavor. So pajama pants are, like, banned from the team. Hammocks in the trailer are banned from the team, right? Like, it's just be about your business. And we are about reducing time over distance, making boats go really fast, competing from point A to point B, stake boats, lane lines, the whole deal. And we talk about that over and over and over again. So everybody fully understands on the team that the goal of the team is to race fast and to be the best team possible. Equipment handling, there's no better confidence boost as a coach than your opposition arguing with each other while carrying the boat down to the dock, right? Like, yelling at each other to get the boat up and over heads. Like, those things are a huge factor. So, like, you gotta walk the walk. Like, carrying the equipment should not be an endeavor. So carrying the oars down, like, watching, we instruct down to the detail of how you carry the oars. So down at your side, not spinning it in a circle over your head, not pretending you're jousting, like, which we joke around, but, like, look at a regatta. So those things are big priorities for me. There's a TED Talk out there. I think it's Amanda Elmore from the U.S. national team, who goes into some detail about what what is termed as the first follower. And so this, I think, is, I think the premise was, the initial example was like this guy dancing by himself in a park. And it's like pretty silly, pretty ridiculous. And it's leadership in the sense that sometimes the most critical component of leadership is the first person who goes and joins that guy. So I think being the first person to be like, yup, I'm coming with, like, I'm on board, let's do it, is really critical. And so like when I was down at Port, we probably had on average 2 days a week where it wasn't rowable due to conditions. So if Connecticut sneezed at us from the north, that's enough wind, like we had white caps. So oftentimes kids would show up and the water's white capping. They're pretty sure it's going to be a land day. It seems pretty obvious. Like, so I had to get the guys on board with like the key players on the team, the key leadership guys on the team that people take their cues from. Like, somebody's got to be the first guy to get stoked about working hard on land that day. And so eventually we had a good culture of guys are like, all right, like, it's a beautiful day to get fit in the parking lot. Like, here we go. And like guys are hooting and hollering, like getting fired up to do body weight circuits and run in a parking lot. And that's, I think the more you can drive those things home, the more that guys are, I think that goes back to like, it doesn't have to be fun to be fun. The more that guys can jump on board of like, you need those first followers. You need those first people who are, when I say we're going to be on land today, the first person who's like, all right, like, that's great. Like, don't have to worry about boats anymore. We just get to get really fit. And that may seem silly, but that makes a huge difference in the productivity of your practice. So that stuff's a big deal for me. Yeah, so that about covers it.
Perfect. Mike, we do have some questions for you.
Sure.
All right. And I even have comments on what you ended with. I think that first follower mentality is so crucial, and especially as coaches, empowering that to happen with our athletes as we have individual meetings and all that good stuff. But so a scenario from one of our attendees: if you had a team of 9 novice guys and one of the boys isn't into the program, he hasn't bought in completely yet. For example, he stops in the middle of erg workouts. How would you motivate him or her to, or would you bring the subject up with his parents?
I would start with the kid, and I would try to figure out what it is that's driving the kid to be there every day. And then I'm a little bit of a purist on a lot of this stuff. I fundamentally believe that, like, I believe that I sell a good enough product that I can get that kid on board. And I believe it is my job to do it. So one of the things that I was doing at Port was, because I had trouble finding assistant coaches, but needed the whole team to be decent, I rotated off days for the squad so that I could take the bottom boat out on a daily basis. And we had some of those kids on a weekly basis. So I would have like the 4V out by myself on Wednesdays. And all the top guys would have the day off. And so I would go out with those 8s and like bust my ass to build up the bottom kid and to hype that kid up. And so like, I really believe that if kids, you know, I'd go out there and, you know, we had a kid on the team who Liam, like, you got to bend the oar, like lean on it. Like, you're not a weak kid. You got to bend the oar here. And once he starts doing it, it's like, that's it, Liam. When you do that, the boat's really good. Like, that's awesome. Like, you can do this. And just, you got to be the kid's cheerleader a little bit and hype that kid up and build them up to a point where, like, you'll start to see eventually, I think if you build them up positively, like, you'll get that kid to smile. If it seems like you're always frustrated in the kid and disappointed in the kid, it's going to be a lot harder to get them to step up and learn that they actually do like working hard. So any way you can get creative to make working hard more palatable for that kid, and just sort of bring them up, you know, make it seem like you are invested in their success and that you want them to be good and you believe they can be. I think that goes a long way. I don't know if that.
Perfect, Mike. Yeah, no, that's great. And we've got a few more questions popping up in the last 14 minutes.
Sure.
So, um, do you have any weekly motivations to acknowledge your most improved athletes or top effort or
Yeah,
acknowledgement?
that's a great point. I do actually. There are a couple of notes on that. One, I was chatting with a buddy of mine. Andy Sales is probably somewhere on this presentation. He's the head coach of Burn Hills. But Andy and I were talking coming into this presentation about how like we both believe like acknowledge every kid every day. So say hi to the kids, ask them how their day is going, right? Like every kid, and make a point of acknowledging that they exist, that you care that they exist, and that they're an important part of the team. And then building on that, sometimes so we have a guy, we do like toga on 3 at the end of practice every day. So we sort of I decide who's going to take it out for the day, or sometimes the kids like nominate a teammate who did a really good job at something that day. And so sometimes that'll just be the kid who improved the most in the workout. Sometimes that'll be a U17 kid who did a really good job, or a freshman who did a really good job that day, or a kid who crushed the running workout who never wins the erg workout. Any way you can acknowledge more of the kids to make it obvious that you value their hard work and that it's respected and an important part of what you're doing, I think you do the team a big service.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, Mike.
Actually,
How involved? Oh,
sorry, just
go
one
ahead.
last thing. We actually last week, for anyone who may follow the Saratoga Instagram, you may have seen we had a picture pop up on Friday of a kid holding like a gigantic, like ridiculous oversized trophy. And so we actually started that for the new year. And that's going to be a Friday workout trophy that we will determine. They will know the criteria before the workout starts most times of like, this is what's on the line. And there's going to be a hard workout every Friday. And so if you're the most improved guy from the previous week, or sometimes it'll be if you just win the workout outright for the day, maybe it could be weight adjusted for the day, whatever it might be, or it's a running workout, circuit workout for the day. Like someone takes that trophy home for the week and then brings it back to defend it the next Friday. And so we're implementing things like that as we go here and as I get to know this group of kids better. But that's something we just started.
Great. And I think that these questions are kind of related to each other, so I'll combine them for you.
Sure.
How do you handle an athlete who has maybe problematic behavior or attitude on a team that doesn't have cuts? So the athlete isn't meeting expectations. And I think that's especially common with small teams. What would you recommend?
First, I would talk to the athlete and make it really clear what your expectations are. I would try to get the best sense possible of understanding. You want to know that there will be times where you need to cut your losses, and where the kid just isn't going to be a culture fit. Usually there's room to save it though. And so having a conversation with the kid of, hey, like these are the expectations. And if it's a misconduct issue or a bullying issue, or when I first showed up at Port, there were a couple kids using like ethnic slurs and like things that like have no part in our sport or any sport. And so teams have codes of conduct. Like my code of conduct is if I think it's antithetical to what makes the team good, then you're done. And so I pulled those kids aside and said, basically, like, if I hear that word out of your mouth ever again, don't come back. And so we just laid it out. And so building on that, I think at times, and you can make a good judgment call on this of, do you need to call the parent and just say like, look, I just need you to know, I talked to the kid. It seems like he's having a hard time with X, Y, and Z. Is he really stressed? Whatever. And make it obvious to the parent that you're not just mad at their kid. You care about the kid making these changes, and you care about wanting to find a solution that allows the kid to continue being a part of the team and correcting the behavior. And and it may come down to a point where it has to be punitive, but I wouldn't start from that point if you can avoid it.
Perfect. How involved are your athletes in determining and developing the team culture?
I would say they're very involved in the sense that I'm the person who creates it, and they are the people that have to facilitate it. I tell them how it needs to go, and every team's going to be a little bit different. But we basically all the criteria that I just laid out for you, the kids know all of that. I think it's important that the kids know basically all of those things. Like, I wouldn't have a problem giving this presentation to the kids, and honestly, a lot of it is stuff that we talked about in the first 5 minutes of me being employed at Saratoga Rowing. Like, the first time I met the kids, this stuff came out pretty much right away in terms of, these are the team expectations. These are what you can expect from me, and this is what I expect from you. And then we just work to build that every day. And if we're not doing a great job of it, we'll talk about the fact that, like, hey, like, we're doing pretty well at these things. We need to do better here. And I always come at it from a point of positivity, in the sense of, like, we're not doing great on this thing, but we have the potential to be really freaking good. Like, this team can be so good if we do these things, instead of going at it from the negative standpoint of, if you don't stop doing this, we're not going to do well. Be like, hey, like, if we make these changes, we can kick some serious ass this spring and, like, have a phenomenal season, and this team could be great. And I think those two things are the same message, but they're going to be received very differently.
Yeah, Mike, I think that that's great, and I appreciate that you, you're so honest with your athletes, and you speak to the future opportunity rather than a maybe more threatening version of coaching, because I think it is inspiring. I think you get much more buy-in from your athletes, and certainly build your team. You build the growth of your team if the word of mouth is that, hey, this is something really fun.
Yeah.
And then, yes, it is also hard, but that's part of the value in it, and that's the part of the pride of being part of, your team, is that we do all this really hard stuff, but we have a lot of fun along the way. So I think that honesty from you and from us as coaches to the athletes is incredibly important. Yeah, I mean, we have wrapped up our questions. Mike has included his email here. So I'm sure, Mike, if you get some questions, you wouldn't mind answering those. But
Sure.
yeah, thank you all. If there are any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. But if not, I know we have a couple more talks this afternoon, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed the conference so far. But yeah, thank you for being here. Mike, of course, thank you for that awesome presentation. This will also be available for you all after the conference and the weekend is over, so you're welcome to watch it at a later time. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And like I said, Mike, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Sarah. And thanks everybody for listening.
Of course.